Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on with the 31 days of gangster films and cop films, police films from the year 1970 to the present day. And that is, of course, a wide expanse of years, but also I hope that it can afford us with the opportunity to talk about as many films as possible as examples of each of these genres respectively. And so I hope to see you over the course of these 31 days, especially today, because for purposes of today's video, or specifically this video, I'd like to focus in on the police film genre, or the cop film genre, cop crime film genre. And here I have selected a film from 1995, or it's described as being from 1995. And this is a film that, as I say, it can be described as being a police film thriller because its main characters are members of, they are detectives, members of the law enforcement detectives trying to find the solution to these very grisly and terrible crimes involving murder and mutilation and all sorts of very terrible, horrible, grisly things that are associated within the context of the film's plot and the film's world. And what a dark and disturbing world it is. These crimes having to do with the 7 deadly sins. And upon mentioning that, I think I have already alerted those of you who might know what I'm talking about, the film that I'm referring to from 1995, talking about the 7 deadly sins. Perhaps I have already mentioned the title, as in the film that is directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, and starring, among others, in its really stellar cast, Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt as detectives Somerset and Mills, respectively. And they form this duo, this buddy cop or buddy detective duo that is trying to solve these really horrible, grisly murders in the world that is depicted in this film, which is Seven. Seven is what a work this is. And I've already mentioned very briefly what one could describe as being the plot of this film. This is a mystery involving what is apparently a serial killer doing very scary and gross and disgusting and terrible things, and the crimes that are resulting from that. And it's up to this duo of Somerset and Mills, the Morgan Freeman character and Brad Pitt character respectively, on the case, trying to essentially solve the mysteries. And also we have the points in the lives of these 2 detectives, Mills, the Brad Pitt character, being somewhat young, maybe inexperienced, but still very eager, maybe even naive to a certain degree, partnered with the seasoned veteran at the point of retirement, weathered in terms of so much world-weary tiredness, in terms of all the terrible, horrible crimes and police investigation-related experience that he has under his belt. I'm speaking about a Somerset character. This is the Morgan Freeman character. And so already in that setup, I think we have the makings of a fantastic duo. And they get along, sometimes they don't get along, but that's part of the cinema magic and dynamic of Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt and their on-screen chemistry. It really works. It really works indeed. And they each have their characters that have their own respective, say, character, personality quirks or traits. We get a little bit of insight into maybe the personal backgrounds of these characters. In particular, we should say, to the Brad Pitt character and his own personal background with regard to another character who's played by Gwyneth Paltrow. But with those personal details established throughout the film, we also have the backdrop or the direct plot of the murder mystery and the grisly crimes that are taking place that are seemingly related to the seven deadly sins. And so in that setup already, we have the potential, the really gruesome, grisly potential of what might constitute some kind of gross and deeply disturbing physical manifestation of what those mean in these extreme terms. And so we have the horror of the world, the horror of life, the nihilistic viewpoint of the universe, as portrayed through the metaphor of these crimes in the cinematic form. And we have, therefore, too, not just the murder mystery, although that is given to us in these really potent doses of cinematic confrontation. Not only do you have the mystery element and the plot element and the serial killer element and the investigation element, which is also finely tuned, well crafted, and also beautifully poetic in a lot of places. There is a particular sequence involving some classical music and the slow and methodical process of investigation and discovery, combined with the brute force and physicality of chasing people through darkened hallways and the rain and the gray skies, etc. So there is a great and a very potent mix of these vibrant tones of cinema here, as expressed through David Fincher's great cinematic style. So there's that as well. But also in this landscape and the contemplation of seven deadly sins, which has its origins in what might be termed to be religious or almost biblical connotations. We have here the potential of seeing these crimes as a type of metaphor for the battle over the soul of characters, or the battle over the perceptions of the world by these characters. And when I say battle, I mean in very, I think, in very straightforward terms, the battle between, say, good and evil. Or to put it in another way, in terms of a perspective on the world, the battle or struggle between trying to adhere to a perspective of the world that is optimistic, that is filled with hope and aspiration on the one hand, versus being confronted with the possibility that perhaps life is meaningless, and not only meaningless, it is bereft of hope. And another way to express this idea of things being bereft of hope is the world is a place that is filled with a sense of nihilistic tendencies. So is it an outlook that is optimistic, or is it an outlook that is hopeless and nihilistic? And so that is the struggle. And we see the characters too, Somerset and Mills respectively, I think, in their own ways, dealing with this potential and the risk into falling into or succumbing to the perspective of things being totally hopeless indeed, the bleak nature. And that is manifest too in cinematic terms with regard to the color palette, with regard to the darkened tones, the dim, almost cavernous, underground feel. Even though sometimes we have scenes that are set outdoors, it feels very claustrophobic and cramped. And even when you have wide open spaces and you have scenes that seem to be taking place in random fields in the middle of nowhere, there is still a sense of the ominous and the encroaching and the potential for something quite shocking indeed. So there is no letting up in the world of Seven when one watches it. Excuse me. It is a relentless work that is also thoroughly plotted, very engaging, quite shocking indeed. I mean, there are some scenes that just are showstoppers in terms of jump out of your seat type of scares. I must say too, I saw this film in the theater. This is another film from the mid-90s. And so this was a period when I went to the movie theaters a lot, quite a lot, in fact. And one of the films I was very fortunate to see in the theater was Seven. And this film just, it blew the socks off me. And I know many people in that theater back in the 90s felt the same way. There are some scenes where people were screaming in the theater, just shouting aloud and gasping. And there was a real there was a real presence of a shock in the air and when certain events happen. And a credit to this film too, that it's able to present these very bleak, dark tones, while at the same time too presenting us with the possibility of maybe a sense of something good might come out of whatever it is we end up seeing by the end of this film, or something of the hope and optimism of certain characters, or maybe a realistic viewpoint of how to handle the concepts of hope and optimism, even a world that might present itself as being totally bleak and totally hopeless. Those possibilities are not absent from this film. Arguably, this film still has the ability to capture those moments. Maybe it's used in a way to make a metaphor for the exploitation of the innocent, or maybe it's used in a way that is truly and inherently part of the deep message, or one of the deep messages of this film, which is this idea of hope from hopelessness, if indeed one can adhere to that interpretation. But one of the great strengths of a film like Seven is that it can be open to many interpretations, I suggest, indeed. And I think that is also due to, well, it's due to many things. I mean, I mentioned a little bit about the great combination of the Morgan Freeman character and the Brad Pitt character and the other characters that inhabit this world, and the performers here. Their chemistry is brilliant. Morgan Freeman, as he is one of the main protagonists here, he gives us a sense of assurance. There's a calmness, there is a tranquility about him, but also there is a realistic, or there is a type of approach to his method. And we understand too that he understands and appreciates just how terrible this world can be. And through his attempts at adhering to maybe an admiration for art and music and literature, as well as trying to create and maintain a methodical, logical sense of the world, he is also being confronted by the illogical, by the chaotic. And a part of the story of Seven is also how we see him react to the world when he is confronted with the illogical and the chaotic. Now, the similar type of confrontational aspect can be said to be occurring to the other main character of this film, Mills, the Brad Pitt character. And this is also a great performance, as I say. He has a sense of energy and wit, which is, I think, really well balanced with the calm tranquility, relatively speaking, of the Morgan Freeman character. But what Brad Pitt also does, or what he does with his characters, he also shows us the almost the zany goofiness of that youthful energy. He is also somewhat inexperienced, relatively speaking. We also understand that he is somewhat of a newcomer, relatively speaking, and he also has that sense of a youthful, energetic drive that may or may not serve him well throughout the film. And that's one of the points of tension or suspense in the film, just how we see him and his youthful, vibrant, and perhaps even optimistic attitude being confronted quite shockingly in some areas, in terms of how he approaches the investigation and what it is he is trying to solve, and how he solves it, and what the circumstances are that lead to the eventual solving of this crime, if indeed the film takes us down that path. But you have to watch the film to see how the film resolves these issues, if it does indeed at all. Now, this is also due to the strength of this film also has to do with, I think, the bold, vivid inventiveness of the cinema of David Fincher and company. And this is a film where we have, well, I should say that this film, Seven, as I say, I saw it in the theater, and I seem to recall at the time there was, maybe relatively speaking, very little, say, fanfare in terms of the marketing. Of course, now David Fincher is an incredibly famous filmmaker and director in his own right, and quite deservedly so, for so many great examples in his filmography. And so now, whenever there is a new film from David Fincher, one of the strong points of marketing of that film is the fact that it is going to be marketed as a David Fincher work. So this is a very important thing. But at the time, I remember, again, as a casual moviegoer, it was still very early in David Fincher's career. If I recall correctly, the film that he made before this was a film called Alien 3. That's another film that would be very interesting to discuss on this channel one of these days. What a fascinating film that is, but that's a discussion for another day. But the point here is that this film 7 came with, as I say, very little fanfare, and David Fincher, as great a filmmaker as he was at this time and still is at this time, perhaps there was still a lot of things to come from David Fincher that we now know, but it wasn't there yet. But when he had 7, or when 7 was released, it was like a thunderbolt. That was my impression. It was like a total thunderbolt. It felt like it just came out of nowhere. And when it came, it really came, and it established itself, and it said, and it proclaimed, as I was watching in the theater, I am here, and I am here to stay. And my goodness, what authority, force, vision, frighteningly established, by the way. The force of this film and the way it really impacted me and many people in that theater, and indeed theaters across the country and the world, I think cannot be emphasized enough. I mean, it should be emphasized fully, and that was the impact of this film when it landed. And that impact, I would suggest, is still with us, and the echoes of that impact are still with us to this very day. I mean, this is one of the classic films in the crime, serial killer, police, procedural, cop film genre. It is one of the great films, one of the most famous films in David Fincher's career. It is one of the most famous films from American cinema in the 1990s. It has, I'd say, points that still to this day, I've seen it so many times that every time I am shocked and disgusted and moved and surprised. There are so many iconic scenes. I mean, there are iconic scenes involving key critical moments of the film. So I don't want to mention any more about that lest I spoil it for people who haven't seen it. But rest assured, if you're approaching this for the first time, it's an intense watch. It's a grisly watch, I guarantee you. But you are in the hands of great filmmakers and acting talents. And also you are in for a very unforgettable experience indeed. And it leaves so many questions, it leaves so many feelings in the hearts and minds of the viewer, that's for sure. But it is truly unforgettable, and the echoes of this film and the vibrations of this film, I think, are still felt to this very, very day. This is a towering work, it is an electrifying work, and it is a shocking and horrifying work, and oh so effective indeed. This is the work 7. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.